Mr. Tomal Bandopadhyay, Mr. Hardeep Puri, Dr. Shashank Shah, and Ms. Sujata Sen to please come up on stage. Another minute or two of anticipation. In the meanwhile, please don't forget to add KLF, hashtag KLF, I'm so sorry, hashtag KLF17 when you're updating on Facebook or Twitter or any other form of social media. This is a request going out from Kolkata bloggers. Okay, we are about to begin. May I request Mr. Tomal Bandopadhyay, Mr. Hardeep Puri, Mr. Shashank Shah, and Ms. Sujata Sen to please come up on stage. And ladies and gentlemen, please, in the spirit of books and in the spirit of the Kolkata Literature Festival, let's give them a real loud round of applause. Yes, another one. Thank you so much. I start with Tomal Bandopadhyay. He is a business journalist known for his weekly column, Bankers Trust, which dissects major policy decisions and anticipates critical developments in our country's financial sector. He has authored 3 non-fiction bestsellers, the latest being Bandhan, The Making of a Bank, which is a Penguin Random House publication. Tomal Bandopadhyay had to fight a rupees 200 crore defamation suit to get his earlier book published, titled Sahara, The Untold Story. He is currently a consulting editor in Mint, which is India's second largest business daily, of which he is a founding member. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Tomal Bandopadhyay. I can't hear you on stage. Thank you. Mr. Hardeep Puri is our next panelist. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1974. During a career spanning 39 years, he served in senior positions at the Ministries of External Affairs and Defense. He has extensive experience in multilateral diplomacy, served on 3 occasions as a member of India's delegation to the GATT United Nations in Geneva, including as ambassador and permanent representative from 2002 to 2005. Mr. Puri became the president of the United Nations Secretary Council in August 2011 and November 2012. He was also the chairman of the United Nations Security Council on Counter-Terrorism Committee in 2011-2012. He retired from the Indian Foreign Service in February 2013 and joined the International Peace Institute, New York, which is a non-profit think tank with headquarters in New York and offices located in Vienna and Manama. Presently, Mr. Puri is the Vice President of the IPI and Secretary General of the Independent Commission on Multilateralism. Mr. Hardeep Puri, ladies and gentlemen, he represents your country on international forums. Another illustrious panelist with us this afternoon, Dr. Shashank Shah. He's a visiting scholar at Harvard Business School and has a joint appointment as project director and fellow at the Harvard University South Asia Institute. An expert in the field of stakeholder management strategy and corporate responsibility, he has more than 100 national and international publications to his credit. Dr. Shah has been a recipient of the President of India and Governor's Gold Medals for excellence in the MBA and MPhil programs at Sri Satya Sai Institute of Higher Learning and of the AIMS International Outstanding Doctoral Management Student Award at IIM Ahmedabad. A former visiting scholar at the Center for CSR, Copenhagen Business School, he is currently a fellow at the European SPES Institute, Belgium, and also serves as editor-in-chief of the Harvard University Postdoctoral Editors Association. Need I say more, ladies and gentlemen? Dr. Shashank Shah, again a global citizen. Thank you for being here. And now, the director of the Kolkata Literature Festival, who we completely adore, Ms. Sujata Sen. Ms. Sujata Sen has had a distinguished career in publishing, journalism, education, and books. Currently, she is the CEO of Future Hope, which provides care and education to street and slum children in Kolkata. She is a former director of the British Council East India, and in that capacity, she had organized the India focal theme at the London Book Fair in 2009 with numerous book events in India and the UK. She has been a publishing editor and a journalist and columnist and is an honorary member of the Publishers and Booksellers Guild and is also the director of the Kolkata Literature Festival. We need to give her a very, very special round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. She's an integral part of the Kolkata Literature Festival. Thank you very much, and she is the moderator of the session. Have a wonderful session, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Can you please have the mics on stage working? Thank you.
Mona. We have a very interesting panel here. From the individual to the corporation to the global. I have with me their latest books. Tamal Bandopadhyay's latest book is Bandhan, and this is the making of Bandhan Bank and basically also the biography of Chandrasekhar Ghosh, a remarkable individual, which you will get to hear about more from him. But Tamal has focused his writings on the individual and their impact on corporations and society. Next to Tamal, we have Shashank focusing on the corporation. And his latest book is here, The Win-Win Corporation. And of course, this book is about the impact of companies on society and shareholders and the communities they work with. Then we have Dr. Hardeep Puri with his latest book, Perilous Interventions, but there is another book on the way. And this is about decision-making and how it impacts the world, and of course the world of companies and individuals. So we are going to take the panel from individual to corporations to the global impact. I would first like to start with Tamal and ask him to tell us a little bit about his latest book and Chandrasekhar Ghosh and what happens when individuals take decisions and make corporations which have an impact on society.
You know this. You actually have two questions. One is what happens when an individual takes decision, and the other part is the bandhan. So I don't consider this a book on an individual in that sense that you're talking, because for me it's individual and the corporate entity, in this case bandhan, is sort of inseparable. You know, so when I look at somebody in this case bandhan, or in previous case Subrata Roy, and even previous case other persons, it's not because what he wears or what he eats or what he thinks. This person stands for something. Something's good, bad, ugly. So I don't come to the table with any value judgment per se. My entire idea is to tell a story in a very simple way, which my aunt can understand or a schoolboy can read and relate to. So even though it's all about finance, I don't get into all the ROE or ROAs or the profitability, and it's not from the investor's angle. It's a story about an individual. It's a story about an entity, and even larger than that. For instance, Chandrasekhar Ghosh, who is originally from Tripura and then partly in Bangladesh, he got educated, and then in Kolkata, etc. I originally belonged to West Bengal, but 30 years now I am out. But sitting in Bombay, I was watching this man. He is doing something very different. And in 2007, 8, 9, when he was not known to the outside Kolkata, I used to call him, invite him at public functions to talk about microfinance, etc., etc. Now, and it's one part of the story that he is giving loans to the underprivileged, to the so-called bottom of the pyramid people in lakhs and now in millions. That's only one part of the story. But other part of the story is this: he was giving jobs at that point of time, 10, 12,000. And now, of course, after becoming a bank, it's much more than. Now, somebody in Kolkata, sitting in Kolkata, operating out of Kolkata and giving jobs to 10, 15,000 people, I thought it's a fascinating story, because I don't need to tell you, it's a very politically sensitive state. And the outside impression, those who are out, Provashi Bengalis or non-Bengalis, you have the general impression is that this is a place where things don't happen much. In terms of literature, in terms of festivals, this kind of Boimela, Academy of Fine Arts are fine, but when it comes to employment generation, come to this kind of productivity linked work and all, doesn't much happen. This state is not known for that. So I find this man was doing something, giving jobs to thousands of people, giving loans to lakhs and millions of women in the bottom of the pyramid. The so-called default rate is very low in a few basis point, say at 1 or 2 paise, 20 paise for 100 rupees. And I don't need to tell you how the high street banks operate and what's the kind of situation there. And he is giving, he is creating an environment which was probably not seen. He is the first entrepreneur in that sense has come out in independent India, post-independence in this part of the country. And then when I decided, okay, something can be done on him, and then I started talking to people, and then I found that this gentleman has taught others to dream. So this I found is quite a fascinating story. So just to one small correction, this is not a biography. This is not a biography of Chandrasekhar Ghosh. There's only one chapter, not even 1/10 of the book is invested in him. But the rest of it is this about entrepreneurship, about inspiration, and how one gentleman with this kind of background comes and teaches people to dream. And finally, just 30 seconds more, all these things have been done not as a CSR activity. It's a hugely profitable organization. So that's the other dimension I found here, the combination of doing good to the society and doing it profitably. So it's not that you are doing something, it's a charity kind of thing, which I found quite interesting. And that was a provocation for me getting into the subject after doing something on Subrata Roy and getting slapped with a 200 crore case. So it's a completely different story. To cut a long story short, I look for individuals, as I said, good, bad, ugly, what's and all, and want to tell the story to the outside world without resorting to any jargons or those kind of financial parameters and all. So I don't tell people to invest or not to invest or stay away. I want people to either be aware, certain things can happen, this gentleman could be doing something, so keep your antennas on, be careful about it, or this gentleman can teach you how to dream, this is something unique, and so that's it, to cut along, so this is the story.
So,
Thank
but
you.
nevertheless, Bandhan Bank is about the story of a remarkable individual, Chandrasekhar Ghosh, the first person to get a license for a private bank in this part of the country. And if you talk about Bandhan Bank, you necessarily think about Chandrasekhar Ghosh, and you have said how Chandrasekhar Ghosh has gone on to create jobs, gone on to create wealth, and created a remarkable organization in this part of the country by just dreaming big. I'm going to go to Shashank and ask you, about companies. Are companies made of people like this? The companies that you write about, are they made of dreamers, or are they made of a boardroom which just strategizes? How do they become win-win corporations?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And I'd like to just give a little background to the book. Actually, in this panel, I'm the millennial. So I've started the book that way. It's a millennial's journey in the world of business. And I was witness as a kid and as a college student of the transitioning India in the 90s and 2000s, where we moved from Fiats and Ambassadors to the Hondas and Toyotas. We moved from Thumbs Up and Limca to the Cokes and Pepsis. So we saw a very tangible change happening. But I also saw, on one side, success stories of companies who were doing exceedingly well financially. And then on the other side, what happened with Satyam made me think as to what is the role of corporations in the larger society. As a country, what is it that India Inc. should be contributing? Not in terms of social well-being, but in very existential purpose of a corporation. And that's what the second part of this book talks about. It's more of a travelogue. And I went around interacting and interviewing industry captains, subject experts, about 200 of them, across companies, across industries, across geographies in India, to find out what they thought is the best way to run companies. And these were, mind you, very successful companies, financially successful, brand-wise successful, growth and profitability-wise successful. And the unanimous answer I got was that the company is successful when it creates win-win solutions for its stakeholders and for itself. Now here stakeholders includes your customers, your employees, your shareholders, your supply chain partners, the society and community, the environment, and the government. So how the company works towards a win-win strategy such that it succeeds commercially and it also does well in the interests of these stakeholders is what win-win is all about. When I went to the Europe and to the United States of America, I remember this interaction with Professor Edward Freeman. He's often called the father of stakeholder theory from the Darden School of Business in University of Virginia. And he said that to say that a company exists for providing shareholder returns alone is to say that the purpose of the body is to produce red blood corpuscles. Now, finance and shareholder investment is critical to a company's survival, just like red blood corpuscles are for a body's survival. But what is it that a body does with all the energy and all the biological balance that it has can be compared to what a company does with all the financial support and success that it does commercially. So that's what made me think that how do I know how companies have successfully gone about doing it? And that's the third part of my book, Win-Win Corporations. And the Harvard Business School has concluded that the best way to teach business is to help young entrepreneurs and young managers take effective decisions. And that is done through the storytelling method. So this book is also a storybook about how companies have successfully grown, commercially done well. For example, the 6 companies that I have profiled in my book, if you would have invested ₹1 lakh in the Sensex companies in 96, by 2016, your return on investment of ₹1 lakh would have been 7.9 lakhs. But if you would have invested the same amount in the win-win corporations, the 6 of them equally, by 1996, by 2016, the returns are a whopping 54 lakhs. So they have done exceedingly well financially, but more importantly, they have done very well with their stakeholders. And I have covered 6 of them, 2 from the pre-independence era, the Taj Group of Hotels and Hindustan Unilever. 2 from the post-independence era, Bharat Petroleum and Larsen & Toubro. And 2 are liberalization's children, HDFC Bank and TVS Motor Company. And each of them have a different ownership pattern, each of them have a different industry, each of them have a different focus. But the common pattern that I saw across all of them was their leaders, their board members, their founders were focused on taking decisions or formulating strategies that give them commercial success and also ensure the larger interests of all their stakeholders. And that's how I conclude my book, that this is not just stories, but what are the key takeaways for entrepreneurs? How can I become a win-win leader? How can a young entrepreneur or an MSME become a win-win corporation? And I've provided 30 key insights across 7 stakeholders on what can you and I do when we lead functions in business or when we start an entrepreneurial venture so that we may become a win-win leader and a win-win corporation. So that's an overview to what the book is attempted to present. And I resonate very well with Tamal that the essence of a good management book, a good business book, is how my grandmother or my auntie is able to relate to the story. We've had too many jargons in the field of business and finance, which sound very well in boardroom presentations. But to make business literature, management literature more accessible to the common man, we need to use language which they can identify with. And I guess that's the way forward, and that would make business literature more commonplace, more popular in mainstream publishing.
Thank you, Shashank. Dr. Puri, so here are stories of big, interesting, remarkable individuals, of big corporations in the country of India. What power did you feel you had in your hands when representing India on global platforms?
Before I come to any power that I may or may not have had, I'm in total agreement with what my colleagues on the panel have said. One slight nuance, one slight disagreement. You know, I'm a feminist. So when you have to cite someone as understanding the narrative, better to cite your grandfather than your grandmother. That's the only limited point I make. Also, you know, I have grown up in this country. I have spent 40 years or more outside. I come to this discussion from a slightly different point of view. And this is the world of peace and security. Why is the Security Council important? And what is my book about? The Security Council is important, and if I may be allowed a primer, is because countries are allowed to go to war only under two conditions. One is in self-defense, if they are attacked, or if the Security Council has made a determination that there exists a threat to international peace and security. And if the Security Council makes that determination, then the Security Council can give you authorization for the use of force, all means necessary, and then you can take action. Now, if you look at what is happening in the world today, all the wars that are taking place, and you ask yourself the simple question, which of these wars has been authorized by the Security Council, or which of these wars is in self-defense, you will get an idea about the extent to which these are man-made problems. Now, Sujata, disasters come in two kinds, natural disasters and man-made. I study, and this book is about decision-making which is flawed. Decision-making where the person taking the decision or the organization taking the decision took wrong decisions. Let me give you a very brief history. In 2003, the United States came to the Security Council and alleged that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And they requested Security Council authorization on the basis that if Saddam was not checked, he would use those weapons of mass destruction to commit mass atrocities. A skeptical council refused to be persuaded. The Security Council said, we think that this is not a genuine narrative, this is a flawed narrative, the facts have been embroidered, and the Security Council did not give authorization. The rest is history. They went in and carried out military action in any case. Then in 2011, they came to the council for authorization to use force in Libya. Because everyone was agreed that Gaddafi was somebody who was unpredictable and who had used force in the past, a skeptical council gave limited authorization. And then in Syria, Libya had gone completely wrong. No one was willing to believe that narrative. There were double vetoes by China and Russia, and the rest is history. My book traces the origins of the creation of ISIS. What is ISIS? To me, the ISIS is the unwanted child of a neglected and failed occupation in Iraq, the unraveling of a country. It has been produced not only through the metamorphing of other organizations, the disbanding of the Baath Party, but it has been created by the countries which are now fighting ISIS. My book quotes the then Vice President of the United States, Joe Biden, who made a controversial statement at Harvard, where you teach, Shashank, where he said, well, everybody was so keen to get rid of Assad that we all poured money into any group that was willing to fight Assad. And then they created a $500 million fund in order to train the moderate opposition. But the moderate opposition took their money, took their arms, and went across and joined ISIS. And then I finally quote the present National Security Advisor. He became National Security Advisor now, but I wrote my book 1 year ago to quote him to say that the decision to help ISIS was a willful decision. So now you create a monster, now you have to fight that monster, and I'm not even sure that you are actually fighting unitedly. And I'm going to conclude this session by saying policymakers at senior levels, including in the Security Council, are never presented with easy choices. It's not a choice between a good option and a bad option. The choices you are faced with come as a series of lousy options. So you have to pick up one lousy option. But unfortunately, in the case of Iraq, Libya, Syria, Ukraine, Yemen, we have gone completely wrong. And the world is in turmoil. And of course, the election of President Trump and Brexit haven't helped out either.
Thank you. You are basically talking about stupid decision making. May I go to Tamal and ask him about stupid decision making in the companies that he has written about, in Bandhan Bank maybe, in Sahara or any other company. Would you like to talk about stupid decision making, especially by individuals?
You know, there are two things. I'm not very sure whether I'm qualified, because the way Mr. Puri had seen things through a different glass, and there, what is good and what is bad is probably.
No, I think Tamal, if you take it to Sahara, for instance, let's go back to Sahara and
that's what I'm
Subrata
saying.
Roy.
It's not a stupid decision making, because Subrata Roy, is he stupid? Certainly not. He's a very, very intelligent person and extremely wise decision.
Why is he in this condition then?
So
Why is he where he is then?
No. The point I am making is this. He had been into shadow banking, right? And there is a series of allegations that the outside world had against him. But for instance, even the case which the SEBI filed, and for the non-payment of 20,000 odd crore, etc., and he had to spend many months, 2 years plus something, at the Tihar jail, and finally he got out of parole after his mother died. Has there been a single investor complain against him? Certainly not. What you see in Shardas and others in India, in West Bengal context, there are hundreds and thousands and lakhs of people have lost money. Have you heard a single case where an individual has lost money in Sahara? Has anybody gone to court saying Sahara? My book is very critical of Sahara. So I am not defending him. But the point I am making, I am not getting into this stupid decision-making part is this. Because now the basic question is, so do the individuals exist? Or are they fake? Is he putting actually money of politicians and showing it as individual, and all the names are wrong? So these are the issues. So if somebody actually, and it's not been proved, but if he has done it, can you call him stupid? He's an extremely intelligent person.
Tamal, he's done certainly something wrong to be in jail for so long.
But
you've done something wrong to be in jail for so
no,
long.
and I disagree with you,
Yeah.
because his wrong thing has not been established. This is one of the case of judicial activism where without kind of anything is proof, this person is sent to jail. Again, as I said, I am not holding candle for him. Neither the book on Sahara, The Untold Story, is an eulogy of him. The book is extremely critical, and book has raised many, many issues. But he was on jail because he has done something wrong that has not been judicially proved. This is a very simple point. This is nothing a case of judicial activism.
Okay, there's a reaction from.
Sujata, since this is a fascinating discussion, may I just come in very briefly? If instead of asking the question and couching it in terms of stupid decision making, if you couch it differently, let me give you an example. I was at the Jaipur Literary Festival with three foreigners, two Britishers, one American. And one of the authors who's written a book, Emma May, she has written a book on Iraq, how she got involved in it. And the other person, who was the moderator like yourself, was asking, oh, so Iraq was a failed project. It was a folly. And I butted in, I said, wait a minute. The occupation of Iraq was illegal. It was a criminal act. You went and destroyed somebody's country. So you can't call it a folly or a failed project. Now coming to, instead of discussing a particular case where he has a point of view, I would say that at least in my world, in the world of peace and security, if you set out making a decision on the, knowing that it is wrong, you would not do it. But you did not listen to people. And therein lies the stupidity. You could have understood what the implications are, but you were delusional. You thought you had the military power, and military power could solve a problem. And you discovered military power went completely wrong.
Shashank, when did corporations didn't listen to people and go wrong?
Yes, so I'd like to give two examples. One is of the Hindustan Unilever, and I've quoted that in the book as well. And this was about their competition with Nirma, the homegrown brand, and Mr. Karshan Bhai Patel as a brilliant entrepreneur. And given the stature, the scale, and the scope of Hindustan Unilever's presence across India, they had what they themselves call a kind of corporate arrogance, that we won't have any competition after all. It's a startup, it's a native brand, it's just a small-time entrepreneur. And over 10, 15 years, the tables turned, and Nirma became the market leader in value for money, affordable detergents. And the leading brand of HUL, which was Surf, was number 2, and the percentage difference between them was huge. And that's when Hindustan Unilever really realized that they made a mistake by underestimating their competitor. And then they put together a strategy, they turned the tables again, they launched a value for money product in Wheel, and how they did that, the entire process, and then how they kept the environmental aspect of Wheel in mind. That's very interesting, because they knew that Wheel would be used by the rural people. And the water bodies where this Wheel would be used is the same water body for bathing, for washing, for cattle, for everything. So the chemical content and the kind of oil they use in the manufacture of Wheel was quite environment friendly, so that the water bodies are taken care of. So they turned around in a more integrated fashion. And when the next round of competition came with Ariel, they didn't wait that long thinking that the market is not ready for a premium detergent brand. They quickly brought out Surf Excel from their kitty and provided quick competition. So you make mistakes, but you turn around really well, so that you are proactive in your strategies going forward. Another example I would like to give of the TVS Motor Company, when they separated from Suzuki, and even before that, when some of their industrial decisions went wrong, and there was a lockup in their factory, and there was some dissonance with the value systems of the founders vis-a-vis the value systems of the labor force. And from then to where TVS reached in mid-2000s, it became the first two-wheeler automobile company in the world to receive the Deming Prize, which is the highest honor in total quality. No other company in the world had received it before TVS Motor. And this was possible with the support of their labor force, their employees, their processes, the collective decision making that they took, and turned the tables again and became successful. So the problem with the labor which they faced, which led to a shutdown, was turned around into a strength where the labor force and the workers themselves became a part of the success story of making them a Deming company and the first in the world. So you can make mistakes, but it's how you turn yourself around and decide not to make them again, at least the same kind of mistakes, so that you can move ahead on your vision and your growth trajectory.
Thank you. Dr. Puri, any examples where India has made mistakes in the global platform and then reversed its position and made amends and gone back?
No, thank you very much. I don't know of any individual or any country which can say that it has not made mistakes. We all make mistakes. But as my young friend Shashank says, maturity and strength comes from knowing that you're making a mistake and then correcting it. Well, we made a mistake soon after we became an independent country. The India's first Prime Minister, the highly respected Mr. Nehru, decided to take the Kashmir issue to the Security Council because Mr. Nehru was the quintessential product of the interaction between India and the West. He had great faith in the British. He had great faith in the Americans. But he had, I think, miscalculated one basic thing, that the British and Americans at that point of time were not our friends in the way we were their friends. They wanted to play one against the other. It was the same divided impera policy. So it was a mistake to go to the Security Council. But I think we learned very fast after that, and we have dealt with the Security Council with a good degree of circumspection and caution. We make mistakes every day, every country. But I think a mature foreign policy, and I think we have a very mature foreign policy, we are able to read signals, we are able to anticipate, and therefore we make less mistakes.
I just want to add, point one is this: in India, corporate world, and particularly in finance, it's very personality cult driven. You are always, one person is identified. HDFC is Deepak Parekh. HDFC Bank is Aditya Puri. Bandhan here in very small now, in terms of both size and years, Chandrasekhar Ghosh. Kotak Bank is Uday Kotak. Look at corporate world, even ITC is Jogi Deveshwar till today, because he was the person who was driving it. AM Naik is L&T. So it's a very, very personality driven, it's a personality cult. But unlike in a situation, say in Kashmir problem and other issues and all, in corporate world situation is so dynamic. So you are taking a call on a given circumstances and situation. And then at hindsight, we can think thousands of things have gone wrong. But you have taken a call for an available information at this point of time. So you have to give that, that exercise. Even for Reserve Bank of India governor, when he takes a call on interest rate, hike or this thing, he is taking a call. Now, we journalists and commentators, we sit in our armchair and you say it's wrong, etc., etc. But, as I said, that gentleman is taking a call at a given point of time with the available information. In slightly political world is different. Like for instance, very raising example at this point of time is demonetization. You will find more people are anti-demonetization than pro. They're saying it's a politically motivated mood. It is not giving the kind of results it's been expected to be. Short-term pain is too high to compensate for long-term gain, etc., etc. But here is a little bit of politics involved, and because it's done by the administration, in the sense the central government, so you can question all these things and all. But in corporates, there's a lot of gray areas remain. So, as I said, at hindsight, what you call stupid decision, at that point of time, given the information available to the person who is heading the company, probably that was the thing where you would have done and I would have done.
Decision making for an individual.
You will get your chance to contradict, it's not a problem at all. You can't have a democratic formula there. As far as threats are concerned, the threats are, if you talk about, when you talk about individual companies and other Indian companies and all, so point of time we are talking about certain threats of the anti-globalization, what is happening in the US now, right from clamping down a visa and closing the doors, so on and so forth. So you are talking about US Federal Reserve hiking rates, but we don't want this, so that the money will start, outflow are already started and more money flow will get out of India. So these are all external things. But internally there are certain issues and all, no? So if we don't, as he rightly said, if we don't have the right kind of ecosystem, if we don't have the right kind of reforms, structural reforms, because what very often we find that more noise than actual doing, or maybe the intention is good, but the execution is not good. So if you don't take care of all these kind of things, and if you don't look at for an inclusive growth, then the demographic dividend that we were talking about, it will not be dividend, it will be a disaster. So you will figure, in the pockets of disillusionments across India, pockets of rebellion and so on and so forth. So if you see the history of past many decades, where are employments happening, the division, the wide gap between rich and poor, it's widening in India. So are we being able to address those issues? I mean, you are, unless you address those kind of things and look for the real structural reforms, India has immense possibility, and everybody says that next decade is India's decade. That's fine theoretically on paper, but unless we are sensitive to all those issues, the threats are always there, and those external threats will come and go, anti-globalization or the dollar strengthening, all the US Federal Reserve hiking rates. But the internal, which is within our control, we need to be sensitized. We need to sensitize ourselves to address them on a war footing.
Thank you. We'll have responses from Shashank and Dr. Puri, and then bring this session to a close.
Yeah, just a quick response. I fully agree with Tamal. What I meant was that when decisions are taken, the interests of all concerned need to be kept in mind. But decision is always the leader's prerogative, and he needs to be taking them, ensuring that all these diverse interests are as important as his commercial success and growth as a priority. And I would like to quote, and I've also mentioned in the book, like Mr. Venu Srinivasan, who is the chairman of TVS Motor Company, when I was talking about CSR, he said, CSR is a function of the CEO. It's the CEO's responsibility because he sets the tone at the top. If he sets the tone at the top and gives that as a priority for the company, automatically all other things will fall into place because the vision is coming top down. But the top down vision needs to be a win-win vision. That's my proposition.
Two short comments. I had asked for the mic because I was going to say decisions, I agree with Tamal, is taken by one person, but the decision has to be thought through. You must look at the consequences. Number two, I don't want to end on a disagreeable note, but I'm actually done more work on trade policy and markets and, corporates. Capitalism loves markets, but capitalism also rigs the markets in favor of the elites. We have to be very careful. And Brexit and Trump have taught us that you cannot go down that road without being very conscious of job creation. Even in India, even I'm a proud Indian, let me say, all the potential we have of success will not succeed unless we provide jobs for the young people coming into the market. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll bring this session to a close on that note, but there's also a note of hope. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, one of the most outstanding sessions that we've had at the Kolkata Literature Festival. Panelists, please remain on stage. Please remain on stage. Where's your spirit? And we have the director of the Kolkata Literature Festival as the moderator of this session. May I now request the General Secretary of the Publishers and Booksellers Guild, Mr. Tridip Chatterjee, to please felicitate these eminent, internationally renowned panelists who make a difference to our lives. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, I also want to make an announcement that the panelists Tamal Bandyopadhyay, Hardeep Puri and Shashank Shah's books are available for signing at the B-Books counter outside. So if you would like to interact with them and get their book signed, please proceed.